Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Crew Car with myself, James Battey, and I'm very only joined by Dr. Simon Gordon. Afternoon, Simon. How are we?
Oh, I'm good. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, no, but thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy day doing important stuff to spend time talking with me. Yeah, I just wanted to get an idea of your background, how you found yourself in yachting, being a doctor from general practice, like how did it all come about?
Sure. So, I'm a GP and I'd been working in London and I'd been commuting from the south of France. My wife is French, going backwards and forwards, and wanted to stop the backwards and forwards to the UK all the time. And there was a guy who a lot of people in yachting know in the south of France called Dr. Patrick Ireland.
Yeah, my old ENG1 doctor out there in Valbonne. Yeah, there we go.
So the whole world in the south of France, he was involved in yachting. New Dr. Ireland. He was like an institution. And then he was packing up his stethoscope. I took over. Now, he was doing ENG1s, and I think the most interesting thing was when I took over, I was very upset at the time, but it didn't give me the right to do an ENG1. But what it did is it gave me a right to speak to everybody in yachting about what was really going on about their health for a couple of years before now I am an ENG1 doctor. So I'm just here sitting in Valbonne, which is a place where, there's a lot of more sort of senior crew live around here. And, I'm often dealing with the families as well.
Okay, yeah.
So, I sort of sit at the side. I know people involved in everything, literally everything in the industry. It's not just crew. I know people who run agencies. I know people, brokers, all sorts. So I'm just chatting to people the whole time about their lives and I have a bit of a feel for what's going on from the side.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, it's nice that you have an overall kind of viewpoint of various different aspects, not just captain. I mean, Valbonne and that area is very much captain's country, as we like to call it. But yeah, to have that insight into people from management companies, because like you said, there's a lot of expats that live in the area. I mean, it's a wonderful place to live, lovely climate and great lifestyle. And now, what do you see within yachting? I mean, in the time that you've been within sort of on the periphery of it, do you see a sort of a demise in certain things in people's mental health? I mean, how much did you know about yachting before you came into, working alongside Dr. Ireland and whatnot? How much did you know about yachting, and did it sort of live up to what you thought, or were you kind of surprised, like, wow, I can't believe that there isn't this and this, or like, what was your initial thought process?
So I think it's come over time. Right. So I think one of the interesting things is that I've worked as a doctor on the side of industries. So at one point I was doing private medicine on the side of banks and lawyers and saw how the industry itself, or certain companies, let's put it that way, decided that it would be in their benefit to set up support for a sort of health in the broader sense of the word for their staff. And then also the past couple of years, I've been doing similar to the ENG1s, but for the offshore industry. So it's just interesting to see the sort of comparisons about yachting and these industries.
So how does it compare? Like, will you say the offshore industry? From my perspective, the offshore, particularly oil and gas, obviously with the amount of money that's within that field, very similar. We obviously have a lot of money within yachting, but that's kind of private for enjoyment as opposed to business. How does it compare the support that maybe the people working within that environment get comparatively?
Yeah, so they're much more, no disrespect to anyone. Look, yachting's interesting because essentially the way I see it is each yacht is its own little business, or to a certain extent, property of the owner. And then you've got, the agencies sort of running it, and the relationship is more sort of fluid, right?
Yeah.
So the oil rig industry, it's interesting enough. The oil rig industry, it's not the law, right? So everything they do is of their own doing, right?
Yeah.
And in yachting, what people don't get about the ENG1, I don't choose what's in the ENG1. It's international law, right? It is what it is. And some of it makes a lot of sense, and some of it makes no sense, right?
Yeah.
So the oil rig industry is much more structured. Sometimes they ask a lot more from their medicals They are much more, they're not ticking a box, right? There's a degree of tick boxing, but some of them are very serious about the safety. They're thinking very practically is like, can I get this guy, off the rig, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot more sort of exercise testing and things like that. So it's just more professionalized. They've got doctors who work in-house, so they can, if there's a bit more flexibility. It's different. And I'm trying to sort of
make it as
I'm trying to
BC
sort of explain
as
why it's
possible.
important for the yachting industry. But let's put it this way: an organisation in the oaring industry, they won't turn around and say, "All right, tick box, we're fine, we're all good," right? Their safety is much more serious. I spoke the other day actually with someone who was a retired head of safety for about one of the big agencies, and he was like, he sort of shrugged his shoulder. We've got the ENG1, we're good, right? But if you see, it's funny. I was at an ENG1 conference a couple of years ago, and they showed a video of people on a fishing vessel in a storm, and how everyone had to like physically be fit, and how they had to move and things like that. And when you're doing an ENG1, you tick the box, but I don't think people really realize. I mean, I'm ex-military, so you know what it's like to be in a real chaotic like crisis, right? And that's really what people don't get when they're doing the ENG1, and I don't think sometimes people get it. And we were talking beforehand about not knowing really what's going on in the industry. We don't know how many people, how many boats have gone down, how likely things are happening, how often people have had heart attacks in the middle of the Pacific or doing a crossing. There is a lack of deep understanding about the risks of what go on in the industry, right?
Yeah. Do you think that's because we want to keep it that closed, because yachting's a kind of niche industry, that data isn't there? Because also by sharing that data, they kind of weaken their own stronghold, I suppose, over it. And that's why they don't want it out there, because I think people have definitely pushed, and rightly so, in these last few years about the mental health of crew. It's, as an environment, firsthand, I can tell you, it's very challenging. Especially if you've got families and whatnot, and you're away from people for long periods of time, and you're working long hours. And we all know that, when you're tired, suddenly irrational decisions can become very rational in your mind, because you start to take shortcuts because, you're not thinking straight due to tiredness. Do you think that, you mentioning about the oil and gas and how they sort of work in rigs and how it's more rigorous, maybe, do you think that we need to look at maybe changing it a little bit, having the ENG1 serving its purpose, that's great, but also maybe having an additional testing format? Is that something that people have talked about at these conferences? Is this something that people have raised, or is everyone like, no, the ENG1's sufficient?
I don't, I haven't been to these conferences to sort of discuss these things, but I have sort of discussed it with, one agency I spoke to about it. Yeah, basically, I do think it is important, right? ENG1 is an international law. It's defined years ago. It's not up to date. You can't be flexible with it because it's the law. On the other hand, there are some things which must feel unfair. So if anybody's read the sort of depression criteria or the ENG1, it's really strict, right?
Right.
And then there's other things which aren't covered. So we're just talking, ADHD is not covered by the ENG1. I know some ENG1 doctors, if you say about ADHD, they'll just say, no, well, I can't give you a certificate, right? That's a grey area. And then on the other hand, there's things like the cardiac risk. You could be a 60-year-old, 40-a-day smoker. His dad died at 50 of a heart attack. If your blood pressure's all right, I have to give you an ENG1. You're at high risk of having a heart attack, right? And if I was an owner, I would not want that person crossing the Atlantic in my vessel, especially if it's captain, right? So I do think, I see captains and I encourage them to do quite a bit more than is part of there. But the ENG1 is not, it's not there to do that. So I encourage them to do more things. I do various cardiac tests and things like that.
Okay.
And I've spoke to the agencies about trying to sort of build that into their systems. It's not the top of their priority, which I get. But
Why do you
it
think
could
that
be an
is?
interesting thing. Because I think to a certain extent, because of the ENG1, right, they feel that they've ticked the box,
Mm.
and I think I don't know. I mean, I have owners as patients, and I've never gone into these sorts of discussions with owners, right?
Yeah.
But I don't think they would be key. It's not, they're already asking for money for things, right?
Yeah.
And they probably don't want to push this other thing, even though it's probably less than some floral arrangement,
But as is often the way, I mean, yeah, you can have owners who want to spend tens of thousands on cushions, but then you say to them, look, we need to get this generator fixed, and suddenly it's like, ooh. So yeah, I would imagine certain people don't want to spend more money on tests. But as you say, it's that ability to show crew that you're kind of going above and beyond and you're caring about their well-being. I mean, there's nothing better for someone in a job, from my perspective, than knowing that there are systems in place that are there to support you and help nurture your career path. And as they say, health is wealth. So, you'd imagine that these things should be high on people's list of priorities.
I would actually, I'm not going to disagree with you, but I'll put a slightly different color on it, right?
Yeah, okay, cool.
Because when I see in the sort of social media when everyone's talking about well-being and things like that, it needs to turn into safety issues, right? That's the way. You need to have a way of propagating it, right? And I know from talking to captains, the feeling of certain young crews saying, but they're not on rotation and blah blah blah, and they're just shrugging their shoulders and they go, "Oh, it's not like it used to be," right? But I think that when I'm talking to you about sort of reducing risk of heart disease, allowing people to keep working, keeping people in good health, if it could be moved from a safety issue, from a well-being issue, you'll find that there'll probably be more funding, right?
Definitely.
And people will listen. So I think, and if you look at, other industries where this happens, so I said I've worked with banks and I've worked with, law firms, this is not done because they're trying to be nice, right?
Yeah. But I think
it's done because they're bettering, they're looking after themselves, the people at the top, right? And they're going to have better organization. That's their real drive.
Well, yeah, and I think you've got to hit the nail on the head by saying when you frame it as safety concerns, it comes with a lot more weight, because I think still mental health and well-being is seen as a bit of a soft issue. People are like, oh, your mental health's not good. People sort of water it down. Whereas when you're like, okay, well, if you're in that environment and you're experiencing that, then that could lead to a safety issue, which then obviously has ramifications to it. So, yeah, I think you're spot on. I think it always comes with more weight when you relate it back to something that could happen due to that person being, in that frame of mind, or having had that circumstance, or having, chest complaints or whatever, but maybe not feeling like they can tell anyone because of the fear of losing your job, that maybe you're going through these things.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, not even just on mental health. Usually each summer, there is a medical condition that I deal with that has been delayed and somebody suffers because of it. They don't want to say, or they're worried about what happens with the charter, or, sometimes it works out well, sometimes it doesn't work out well, Sure. So, having these structures in place. And if someone's sick on a yacht, there isn't somebody to fill in, right? I mean, I dealt with a captain last year, and he had something really potentially serious, and he needed a test done quickly. It wasn't an emergency. Yachts are set up for an emergency, but it was potentially serious, right? And I was able to arrange that. He came here and he had this scan, but there's nothing in place for someone to take over from him. So he happened to have a mate who wasn't working who could take over for that, 48 hours. But, that's something that I've been talking about, trying to put into place, is having these systems in place so that when things happen on yachts, you can quickly turn things around, know that things are good, or not good, I think that would be a good idea, right?
Yeah,
and we're not talking about much money in the scheme of what a yacht costs to run, right?
This is it again. It comes down to structure and support. which I feel as an industry, we don't really have. And because it's so fragmented, because it can come down to which flag state you're with, or whether you have a management company, whether you're private, whether you're commercial, there's so many moving parts that to try and blanket and go, no, you need this as a bare minimum. This is just what has to be accepted. It becomes tricky because it gives people a get out. Whereas when it's just like, this is how it is, it has to be this way. It gives that kind of support to crew, which I think is critical because at the end of the day, without crew, nothing works. And like you say, having that system in place where if someone has to go for a test quickly, it's not a sort of, oh my God, what are we going to do? No one's here to drive the boat, or whatever role they're fulfilling, or we can't get a chef. To have those kind of systems in place would definitely assist in making us look, because it's very difficult to claim yourselves as a professional when we don't really have any systems or structures in place to back up the idea of being professional, is what I've always found in this industry. With the whole mental health side of things, is this something you've seen? Do you see a lot of crew coming in, like struggling because of either very long hours, difficult working environments? Is that something you've seen an increase of? Do people feel more comfortable to be able to come to the doctor and share these things? Is this...
So, as you said, I'm in captain land, so I'm dealing more with sort of more senior crew.
Yeah.
You know, occasionally things sort of crop up with the younger crew. Look, it's not an easy environment for the younger crew to be in.
Right.
You know, they're long away from home, tense, 24/7 environment, people around you. I mean, the thing that I think also, that I personally think that if we should start at the top, we should start with the captains. I think it's not easy for them. I think as people get older, I think there's sort of 3 stages, I would say, in the sort of the mental health of, there's the sort of coming in young, sort of the stress of it and what's going on, issues with alcohol, drugs, that which I see, right? I think there's a stage where specifically, more so for women, I would say, is like, do I stay in the industry because of how it works, right?
Yeah.
Especially if you want to have kids and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. You want to have kids, family, it becomes more challenging.
Yeah, and then there's that whole, once you've got kids, right? Or and then how does that work? I think it's a huge stress dynamic for families, because so I'm dealing with the other side. So I seem to put lots of depressed mums, right?
Yeah, massively.
Who might have started in the industry, but especially around here by themselves in another country. Some of them click into what is, good support structures and friends around them. Some of them don't.
Yeah.
And like,
there's the old saying of captain's widows, because you become a captain's widow. My wife, we've had one summer where we moved, we took for a month, we took a place in Valbonne, and the kids and Kath came down, and we've got 4 kids, but we had 2 at the time. And as a captain, I felt pulled, because when I was at home with them, I felt like I should be at work. And when I was at work, I felt like I should be at home with them. Whereas living in Pembrokeshire, where we do now, when I leave and go to work, I put the hat on, and I don't have that fear of like, oh, maybe I should nip home at lunch or any of that, which I think creates that extra level of difficulty. And I see it, I've got lots of friends who live in Valbonne area and all that, and it's incredibly tough because some of them, as you've sort of rightly identified, don't speak the language. So that makes it harder to integrate into that environment. And maybe, the boats now used to be based somewhere else, but the owner wants to keep it in the south of France. So it's a huge upheaval of, moving family in and maybe not having that support structure. So and like you say, it's not just the crew member, it's the people surrounding that crew member, the wife, the kids, whoever. It can be a real struggle. Real struggle.
Yep. Yeah.
So,
definitely.
I mean, if you had a magic wand, what would you do in order to try and, like, if someone said to you, you can change certain things or you can create certain things, is there anything that you're like, this is what I'd do first? I'd love to put in this or create this.
I think an annual off the record, not to do with the ENG1, so that people can talk frankly, sort of health check, which crosses both sort of psychological and physical stuff. I think that would be a good thing. right? Even the person comes in once a year and they're just developing a relationship and everything is all right and they know it's off the record, so to speak. I think that could be useful, right? The other bit
Definitely.
that happens, and is that people are often not registered in any health system. So they get the
Yeah.
ENG1, they're like, "Oh, I'm fine," right? But they've not had the cholesterol check, they've not had the cancer screening check. As I've said, I think cardiac risk is completely different because, if something happens in the middle at sea, it's a whole different ball game. So yeah, I think that's a relatively simple thing to do. Not, in the scheme of things, not expensive, right?
But
So I think that would be worthwhile. And, if you just started at the top, so to speak, no disrespect to the younger crew, but they have, I think that would be I don't know, how does that sound to you? It also makes you feel cared for.
but but this is it. I think it's like anything. When you feel supported, you feel like you're part of something. Suddenly you have an affinity towards it and you want to invest in it yourself because you can see the long-term benefit of it. And I think it'd be amazing. And I think that ability to have off the record, because we go through a lot of stresses in our lives, from being junior crew through to captains, and it does escalate as you go up in rank because you carry more responsibility and everything else. And you are, caring for not only these crew, but for the vessel itself, the owner, family, charterers, whatever it is. And I think to be able to go and know that you've got markers, essentially, you can be like, well, last year, this was your cholesterol level. This is where you were from a sort of cardiovascular perspective. This is where, you've got those and whether you're going in a positive direction or a negative direction. And then it's really important because you can go into a season with a peace of mind and be like, okay, well, I haven't got any worse than last year. That's a good thing. Ideally you can go, I've got better, but also to know where you have to focus. It's like that ability to have an understanding that your parents may have had heart conditions or whatever. And at least you can kind of go, is this something that, based on the results that I've had, and be able to talk to you and go, is this something I need to be concerned about? Well, I think you should change this. And it'd be my advice that maybe cut this out of your diet and see if we can bring that down a bit. But at the moment, like you say, in ENG1, people just go, hopefully. And then it's like, I'm okay. 2 years, I'm all right. And it's like, that's not necessarily the case. So, yeah, I think it'd be amazing. I think the more we can create in terms of structure and guidelines for people is always going to be a benefit, because then you've got benchmarks to work to. I think anyone likes to know where they were in order to say, am I getting better? Is my career getting better? We all take these benchmarks, so why not have them within our health? Because like everyone has problems until you have a health problem, then you only have one problem. And that's it.
The other thing you mentioned is structure. So, what I would have, have envisioned is, a sort of healthcare structure for people on board as well. Yeah. So them to be able to click into sort of video consultations with a sort of a doctor who speaks their language, who gets a feel for what's going on, who hopefully either has connections with some sort of support close to where you are, and then being able to turn around quickly at shore, because it's different. Time is more critical to you guys. Definitely. I've got arrangements at the local hospital to get tests done for, if I phone up, I'll give you an example. If someone has had a history of kidney stones, there is a whole rigmarole with the ENG1. The local specialists know that, and we can turn it around quickly. Yeah. So I do think some sort of structure of, this, and it can help by a way on an operational level, right? So it helps from not sending someone ashore when you're during a charter and you've just saved yourself a lot of money, right? Yeah. Yeah, and I've spoken to the agencies about this stuff. They sort of, it's just not that.
But I think the problem is in yachting as a whole, and this is everything in yachting, we're not so good at the preventative. We're very good maybe at dealing after the situation, going, all right, well, fine, you need to go to hospital, you've got to do that. Whereas if it had been addressed a month beforehand when they started feeling discomfort or whatever. I mean, talking about, for example, kidney stone, all of this, and you can kind of go, no, we've got someone, you can speak to someone, explain your symptoms, we're out on anchor in, wherever, and you don't have access to a doctor, but being able to speak to yourself and go, okay, well, what are they? Rather than turning to Dr. Google or now everyone, ChatGPT or whatever AI platform, it's actually speaking to someone like we are now and go, well, what is it you're feeling? And I think that's a support system that should very much be brought into our industry. I think video consultations with yourself and other such doctors, who work in the area would be an amazing asset.
Yeah. Or if anyone's interested, they can always reach out to me on that one because it's just so easily done. And, sometimes you speak to people and they've got, a new member of crew and they've got a minor thing. And they're anxious, they're by themselves, they're working all the time and it's building up in their heads. You just need to flatten things down sometimes, say, look, you're all right. Everything's my job a lot of the time is actually reassurance as a GP, right? People, not all of it, and that's an important role because what happens is when you're by yourself on a yacht, thousands of miles from home, possibly having some stressful relationships with other people, it builds up into something much bigger than it should do,
100%. Wonderful. Well, this conversation's been absolutely fascinating, and I can't thank you enough for your time. And I would definitely love to, with what we're building with the Yacht Workers Council, we've sort of got that mental health aspect, but also looking at the medical side for sure. And I'd be very interested to talk to you about that ability to maybe have consultations.
Can I bring up one final thing about ENG1?
You can bring up anything you want.
One final thing, just on my mind, always on my mind, right? As someone here, I took life insurance, in case anything happens to me. And I think, and I've seen it happen, we have our criteria. And the worst thing about being an ENG1 doctor is sometimes you have to end people's careers. Sometimes over silly things that are not awful, right? Medically. Right. I know you're trying to set these things up, but some sort of insurance that covers captains for that likelihood, Yeah. And
in terms of payment protection against, but long term, obviously, for any failings on their own health.
And the other one is for captains a lot of captains are not in countries like the UK where they get free healthcare. They might be in France and they don't have French health, the national insurance. They've got their boat insurance.
Yeah.
And then they might, I've seen it happen. You get cancer, right? And then your boat insurance runs for a certain amount of time, right? Yeah. And then you're out of insurance and your treatment is really expensive. So these are things I know, I just feel if I've got this one opportunity to talk about these things.
But this is awesome. This is the whole idea of what I'm doing.
People really don't think about this, and it's a 1 in 1,000 thing, but it can happen. So it's just something that, just we're finished. I've got this sort of, it's not trendy, but, and it just might affect.
This is the whole point of these conversations, is that we raise matters that are important and maybe go unnoticed and don't get discussed. And that is, I completely agree. I've got 4 kids and my wife back home. If something happens and I'm then unable to work, our life changes significantly. And there is very little structure or support around that from, insurers, employment, everything else. So, incredible. I mean, I will tag everything of yours in there, and anyone who wants to reach out, please do, because I think it's an incredibly valid topic. But I will let you get back to your GP work, and I just can't thank you enough for your time. It's been invaluable. And I look forward to catching up again soon, and hopefully someone will reach out on that score. Thank you so much, Simon. Appreciate it.
If your brand belongs in the heart of the yachting world, this is where it happens. Yachting International Radio reaches over 1 million yachting professionals and enthusiasts every month, with 77 million impressions, 220,000 social followers, and 74,000 podcast subscribers. Our hosts are insiders, crew, captains, CEOs, trusted voices shaping the industry. This is targeted, high-impact advertising in a luxury niche. Visit yachtinginternationalradio.com/advertise. Your audience is already listening.